Hello, everyone, and welcome to the Love Well podcast. I guess we should start by saying happy 2024 because this is our first time back with you guys on the podcast for the new year. So, hope you guys have had a great new year. We're so excited to be back. We took some time, much needed time to rest and travel and get to be with family. But now we're back. So, we are excited. But just to give you guys a little bit of a refresher, we have been talking about immigration and really more so bringing on some amazing guests to share their story and be able to kind of bust the myth around, is immigration all the same and does it all look the same? Because we've just been able to really capture some amazing stories of people from all over the world that have had very different experiences with their immigration process. And so we are continuing to do that today. So, Marlene, do you want to introduce who we have on today?
Absolutely. And we're just so excited to be back with all of you. And as we continue our series on immigration, and if you have been following along, you know by this point that immigration is not a monolith. And we will continue on as we continue to have our guests on here. You will hear every single story is different, and that is a gift. So, yes, my next guest, I actually met her last year, and it was because of the beauty and the beautiful part of Instagram and being on social media. You're able to connect with other people. So I slid into her DMs and was like, hey, I love the work that you're doing. And well, she will tell us a little bit more about as we continue as we have this conversation today. Angelica, we are so glad you're here. Welcome. We are so excited for you to just say yes to coming on and having a conversation and continuing to, as we have the heart and passion to break the stereotypes of what an immigrant is, or what even around and talking about the conversation about immigration. So, Angelica, could you tell us a little bit more about yourself, who you are, what you do? We want to hear all of it.
Well, thank you so much for having me on the podcast. I was very excited to get the invitation and to be able to say yes. And I am here this morning, very excited. My name, as you said, is Angelica Acosta, and my married name is Garnett. I've been in the States for 24 years. I just had my anniversary, January 17th. I
Wow.
remember it very clearly.
Yes.
I am originally from Bogota, Colombia, and I moved to the US when I was 17 and a half because I'm a June baby, so I always know my half point. So I was 17 and a half. I just graduated high school. And so I had grown up and been raised and educated in Colombia before we came to the US. I am married to Tyler, a dude from Montana. That's another crazy part of my story. We have three multi-ethnic, I guess, multinational,
Yeah.
bilingual children who are attempting to figure out how they make sense in this American experiment. So that's really fun. By trade, I'm an educator. So I used to be a U.S. government teacher. Then I was an immigration paralegal. And I serve at ABARA. It's an NGO at the U.S.-Mexico border. I created and managed their Asylum Translation Project, which is basically we meet with migrants in shelters in El Paso and in Juarez, and we help them put to paper their stories of departure, the reasons why they left home, why they're seeking refuge in the U.S., and why they cannot return. It's really meaningful, beautiful work. When I'm not in El Paso, I work as an interpreter for the school system here. I like being in the weeds with the immigrant community, with newly arrived people, helping them understand the system and what their kids might need. I was just doing an IEP this morning, trying to figure out if this little boy who came from Honduras to the U.S. in December had a learning disability, or if what we were seeing was actually just the learning of a new language. And so for me, doing that at home is really impactful because you stay connected and having not mastered, because I don't think I've mastered the system, but having learned the system more than someone that's newly arrived and being able to weigh in on that is really fun. And then I also teach workshops around the country to different organizations, churches, around the subject of immigration. Of like, what is the system? How does it work? What is the journey like for people that are coming here? Because as you've said, not one size fits all. There's very different paths. I think it's really important for people to understand that asylum is a legal right. So even though we see large groups of people attempting to enter, it doesn't necessarily mean that they're doing something unlawful, because the law requires them to stand in line and request. And so it's helping people understand the entirety of the process before they get to conclusions. And then I also do a cultural workshop of kind of understanding that between Latin Americans in particular and people in the US, there is a cultural difference. And the way we do things is very different. The values we hold are different. But I want to introduce this idea of different instead of wrong. Because when you think that something is wrong, you have this natural tendency to want to correct it. And if a person doesn't correct it, then you feel they're wrong and you can isolate them or push them away. But what would happen if we understood it as it's just different? Because we hold different values, we do things differently. How could we, as a people that learn to receive better, how do we learn the cultural paradigm of people coming and helping them unload and kind of enter the system, and also for them to understand they're entering a new cultural paradigm? And so how do we do that better, that bridging of the cultural gap, which a lot of organizations do beautifully to send. So whenever you talk about organizations sending overseas, everybody has to go through like a cross-cultural workshop. You have to take classes. You have to learn the visiting culture, right? Because you're going. But we don't do that to receive. And so having worked in this for so many years is that understanding of like, wait, guys, we have a massive cultural misunderstanding. Like, even if you have the great intentions, you're coming to the table, you just showed up with Candyland, you showed up with bananagrams, different game, different rules. You can't play together until you figure out like, oh my gosh, we're playing a different game. So that's the kind of work that I do, is the kind of work that I am so passionate about. So that was a really long answer.
And I'm glad you went
That was
there and
amazing.
explained all the things. It's incredible, just amazing what you're doing. I mean, as an immigrant myself too, like to hear that you're like, there's one thing of like, oh, you move to this country and you go through all those things at the learning part, right? The culture is like, oh, we need to understand one another. If not, this is not gonna, gonna work. And there's gonna be like the tensions and the misunderstandings, I think.
And I think too, there's this person that teaches cross-cultural studies, Dwayne Elmer, and he talks about like when two cultures meet each other, you either enter that situation with curiosity and asking questions and kind of saying, well, that's different. Or you enter kind of saying like, that's wrong. That's not how you do it. Yeah. And everybody, regardless of how you enter, you're going to feel embarrassed at some point because you have some sort of misunderstanding. You're going to feel frustrated because you feel like the other person is doing it wrong. And those are normal feelings. But then what do you do with that? Do you continue leading on with curiosity and like this mutuality of like, you know what, even though it's different, I'm sure I can glean something from the way you do things. So how can we collaborate? Or you just get so frustrated and isolate and push people away. And so I'm just really interested in that sweet spot, especially having married someone from from the US. And we see this day to day in our own marriage, in raising our children, in traveling back to Colombia, saying like, oh, wow, until somebody pointed it out, like you guys are, working from completely different game. Like it's a completely different game. You're looking for different things. Your goals in life are so different. You go, oh. So now there's this mutual understanding of kind of saying like, when my mom is up in your face telling you how to do something for the kid, it's not because my mom is like violating your boundaries, whatever boundaries mean for like a Latin American person, is that she's an elder. And in our collective communal paradigm, it is her duty to say something. because it is ingrained in her as the elder, the matriarch of that family. She cannot stay silent. She would be violating that social contract that says, as an elder, you speak into the life of all these kids because they don't belong to your daughter. They belong to the whole crew. And so it was very interesting to see my husband shift from like, what does she think she's doing? Like, is she telling me I'm a terrible parent? To like, oh, it's really not personal. She's doing her due diligence, you know?
Yeah.
So even on a very micro level, to see two cultures starting to understand each other and giving each other a little more grace and latitude, you start treating each other as equals. Because then when the other person is wrong, then you're always at a place of, oh, well, I'm superior because I'm doing it right, you're doing it wrong. But if it's all of a sudden, it's just different, but we're equals, there's more collaboration.
Absolutely. And there's something about cultural humility as well that, as it requires a lot of humility to say and enter into any relationship, because it happens, everything you're saying, I'm like, yep. I live with my husband, John, too. He was born and raised here in the US. I was born and raised in a different country in Honduras. So yeah, it takes humility, but also like the beauty that we miss out on those differences too. And that's what we hope as we tell the stories, is like there is, similarities. Yeah. Do we do it differently? Maybe. Do our values align differently? Yeah. But in our humanity at the core, there are things that we can see one another in our humanity, and when we talk as Christians, we're image bearers. This is God's creation. So it goes even, further and deeper into that. So yeah.
Well, and I love too how you were saying like embracing the differences is key, and just how like it can be seen as wrong a lot of times. But we've touched on this actually in like our past episodes, and I love how this has gotten brought up again. Just the idea of like curiosity goes so far, and then the fact that like what Marlene was just saying, like we're called, just like your mom feels the duty of being able to like speak into these kids' lives, like we're called as Christians. If you call yourself a Christian, if you're a believer, we're called to love each other well. And that's why we call this the Love Well podcast, because one of the ways of loving each other well is by asking questions. And like you were just saying with the whole like, hey, we're playing a different game here. How are you going to get to a resolve if you're not asking questions? Like, how do you do things? How do you play this game? How do you, like, there has to be, in my mind, there has to be questions before assumptions, because if you're, like you said, I mean, if you're at the table and there's two different conversations going on, how is there going to be any sort of like resolve or progress or equality? And I think another thing that you also said that just brought to mind like something I saw recently is like that loving well is easy to do when you're within proximity of the person. And so that's why we love being able to also bring in like all these, like you and all of our other guests, to be able to share your story, your personal story, because it brings us closer to knowing who you are as a person. And it brings that proximity for people to listen in and be like, oh, I heard this on the news, but this is a little bit different than what, she's saying here that she's personally experienced, so I love the fact that you even brought up all of that stuff. And thank you so much for the work that you're doing. I mean, that is incredible work that you're doing.
Yeah.
Thank you.
Yeah, no, I agree. Which will continue. I want to expand on some of the things that you have mentioned before, which I'm sure we will. It'll come up organically. But can you tell us a little bit also, like, what was like? You said you moved here when you were 17. Can you tell us a little bit of what life was like in Colombia? If you, you can share a little bit.
Yeah. So I think I have a story that's different from many people because I did not experience hardship. I was not pushed out of my country because of violence or lack of opportunity or any of those push factors that other people experience. My dad is a civil engineer and he was a developer. And in the year 2000 in Argentina and Colombia, there was a crisis, like a housing crisis, almost like here in the States in the 2000s. And a lot of his projects kind of froze, and he had the opportunity through an American company because he was part owner of that company to be transferred as an executive. And so he made a choice to move his whole family. So in that sense, it's different because we really were not pushed to leave. We had the opportunity to move, and we did.
And where did you guys move to? Did you say that when you came here?
We went to Florida. My dad spoke English, and my mom did not. And us girls knew just like Barney level. So maybe I could have ordered something at McDonald's. I don't know. That was terrifying. We tried it the first time. I'm like, I don't think I could do it. My dad's like, it's simple. Just say. I'm like, no. Because people talk back. I don't think. So it's interesting because regardless of what brought you into the U.S., I feel like the immigrant experience is such an equalizer for the immigrant community. Because even though you are like, oh, yeah, you know, I chose to come, whatever, and my family is educated and we had means, we get treated the same. So I think that for me, what I have gleaned and appreciate so much of the experience was a massive crash course in humility. In the culture that we come from, right? Like Sarah Lanier talks about like warm weather culture, who you are and the people you belong to makes a really big deal. So like your last name is a big deal. The connections that you have, that's a big deal. The school you go to. And then all of a sudden they drop you here. And I remember being asked in the airport to fill out my I-94. And it was the options were like, are you white, black, Hawaiian, Alaskan, other, and Latino. And that is such an American conversation. If you go to our home countries, nobody calls us Latino. I mean, if we go by color, that's not even a color. Like, grab the color box and there's no Latino or like Hispanic color. That's non-existent. So that is not a Colombian conversation, not a conversation that we grow up with. So I'm filling out this form and I'm like, well, white, I guess. And I hand the card and the lady immigration officer is upset and gives me the card back. And I'm like, well, I guess I'm black. This is cool. I mean, you know, like I know I'm not Asian, and she's saying I'm not white. I am dark skinned, so maybe in the U.S. I'm considered black. Cool. So and that really got her worked up. And she's like, you are Latino. And I remember being like, what in the world is this thing?
Wow.
So it's upon arrival, I just got smacked with a label that is brand new to me. I don't even know how to use it. Then you're like, what does that mean? You know, Latina, if you break it into, it's like the bathtub. I'm like, this makes no sense. So this has to do something with like Latin American, maybe. I'm like, so can I say I'm Latin American? It's like, no, you're Latina. I'm like, that makes no sense. And they're like, you could also say Hispanic, but that is not respectful. I'm like, well, I guess Hispanic comes from like the people that speak Spanish. Like, at least I feel more of a connection to that. So it was very interesting as I am given a label. I'm also being told that I can't choose which one makes me feel more of a connection to because it's improper. And I'm like, okay, this is super confusing. And then you get slapped with all the other things. Because at this point, your last name is completely irrelevant. Where you come from is completely irrelevant. What you know is completely irrelevant. Who you know is irrelevant. Like, at this point, you're treated as your life starts when you enter the United States. It's like anything out of this country is useless and non-existent. And that was really hard for me to make sense of kind of saying like, whoa, I grew up feeling proud of who I was. I grew up being told all the time that I was intelligent, that I had something to say, that I had something, that I had passion and potential. Like, I come from a highly educated family of people that had very high expectations for what I could do in the world, right? I was never told I was a genius, but there was a level of expectation of like, we have invested in your education. We have high standards for you. And I was like, yeah, you know, I can do this. And then I got here and it was like, all of a sudden I just become lesser than by pure function of somebody slapped a label on me. I have no idea what that is. Now I'm being treated as a complete idiot because I can't speak the language. And then when I learn the language, I get an accent, which also becomes a crutch of even when I say something mildly intelligent, people would be like, oh, wow. And I'm like, why are we acting shocked? Like, I'm probably the dumbest person in my entire family, and you're acting like I just discovered water. Like, this is so confusing. And so it takes a long time to make sense of this new reality where you're constantly being told that you're not enough, that what you have to offer is not as good as everybody else's, and that you're lesser than. And that's a really hard thing to swallow, because that is not how I grew up. So there's a huge disconnect with who I know I am, who God created me to be, and yet what my new environment is telling me about myself.
Dang.
Yeah.
I will say, I mean, we talked about this, but I just got back from Colombia, and not knowing the language, that's a real like confidence, like it just really does shoot down your confidence a little bit. And unless you've traveled, like I don't feel like a lot of people understand when people come here to the States and I mean, you're talking about you're being labeled, and on top of that, now you don't know the language. Like, just not knowing the language when I was in Colombia, I felt like, who am I? What am I doing? Like, this is so like, I don't know. Like, it's scary. It's intimidating. Like, and I mean, yeah, I can't imagine being also told like this is your new life essentially. And this is where it starts. But thank you for sharing that. So as far as when you immigrated here, and you said you've been in the States now for 24 years. What are some things that you've been thankful for after either after immigrating here or realizing once you've immigrated here? What's been like something you're thankful for?
I think that what I am thankful for is what I alluded to earlier, is a crash course in humility. I grew up around privilege, in privilege. Had I stayed in my same environment, I wouldn't have experienced what I have experienced, which has made me a much more compassionate person. The focus was less. Now I think in my life, the focus is less about me, and it's this desire to whatever I can to assist those that don't have the same opportunities.
Yeah.
I would have not learned that same. It's a fire. It's this fire of saying, I understand that because of my background and my childhood, I have been given more opportunities. So I have a responsibility to those that are also here to assist in any way I can to help them level that playing field, even in a little way. That wouldn't have happened back home. I had a pretty clear trajectory of where I was going. And it would have been a very different experience, right? Being a part of the majority culture, being a part of the like dominant group in a particular society where you don't really have to even think about those things. And I think that's part of why I've enjoyed so much having really interesting conversations with people of privilege, particularly white people in the US, of saying like, I'm not coming at you from a place of judgment. I'm coming at you as a peer. I know, sounds wild. But if you stayed in that tanning bed a little bit longer, I would be you, basically. It's kind of saying, like, I understand that in your heart, you don't feel like you're doing anything wrong. Like you're just living your life because you don't have these opportunities to see. And if you were given the opportunity to see, you would be moved to action. So I'm always kind of wondering and saying, like, why would God literally pluck me out of that very cushy gray and drop me here? But it's very interesting in even having this conversation of saying, like, I get you. I didn't see either. For 17 years, I did not see because it wasn't in front of me. And I was a good person living a good life, studying hard, working hard, doing good. But I was still not aware of disparities. And so I think that I will be forever grateful for that crash course of being forced to really engage from a completely different angle of saying like, whoa, not all things are equal. like we have to dig a little bit deeper, and there's work to do.
Wow. Thank you.
So good.
Thank you for saying that. Because I think in one of our previous episodes, we were having a conversation with Anna. It's so hard for us to admit that we do not know. It is so hard for us to admit and even be faced with that. Like, oh, we have privilege. It's not a thing to feel guilty about, but the question is, what are we doing with that privilege? That's what, because I feel similarly, like in some ways, like I did, my experience was a little different back home, but I did have an education, and just that, going to college in my home country, I knew I had privilege. So even, and the fact that I went to bilingual school and moved to the country knowing English put me in a whole different bracket of like, oh, this. And so I am very much aware of that privilege. And I'm not gonna lie, like I've gone through feeling guilty about that. I'm like, oh, the guilt. But then the Lord has like, no, it's shame is not from me. Shame doesn't come from me. So let's remove that shame, but ask yourself, what are you doing with that privilege? And I think that what you just, like, you sharing what you're doing with your privilege, and what, because I have met other, I'm friends with a lot of other Latinos, and a lot of them happen to be also immigrants, and not everyone has that same sentiment. It's like, oh, we move here, we try, which I understand. Sometimes it's like, okay, we left something, we're trying to make a new life, let's move on. But we forget about our communities back home, and we forget about all of that now we have. Is like, oh, but what are we doing with it? That's the bigger question.
Well, I think too that, I don't know. Well, you will stop me if I'm like crossing any boundaries.
Go for it.
No,
go for it.
look,
I think it
no boundaries.
but I think it also has to do with one, cultural supremacy, and I'm just gonna go ahead and say it, but white supremacy, because we are told from the moment we arrive that the good way to be is like successful white Americans. Very quickly, we are told in so many words, Black America, no. So you're like, okay, so if there's a problem with me already, and you've already identified me as Latino, Hispanic, something in the middle, brown immigrant, no good. You just told me Black, not good either, but you keep saying this is good, and the good always happens to look white. I'm not that dense. I'm like, okay, so then white American is what I should strive for, because you just told me, no good. All the other brown immigrants, no good. Black, no good. So, okay, I'm focused. I have to be white. And so what we do so much is we try to get white adjacent, as close to white as we can. And so then we will say things like, I'm not like them. Okay, the other immigrants, they didn't do it the right way. I did. They didn't go to school. I did. They didn't put the effort in learning the language, but I did. And so it's this constant, because we're being told in so many ways, become as white as you can to succeed, then we divorce the brownness. What is curious is that no matter how white adjacent you get to white people, you will never be white.
Yeah.
So you can try to play the game, but you're never going to be a part of the team. And I think until we kind of do a massive like halt, stop, you go, whoa, I see what I'm doing. Like, no, this is bananas. There's nothing intrinsically wrong with me. I am beloved and an image bearer. God wanted me like this. There's beauty and power and resilience and intelligence in this. I don't need to present like this. All of a sudden you go, holy smokes, I drank the Kool-Aid. Pat, let me spit out the Kool-Aid and it's almost like the GPS, recalculate. And you change your vocabulary. And the reason why I can say that like this is because I experienced that in my own skin. You know, I was the only person of color in my grad school class. Everybody was white. I was the only foreigner, the only brown person, black person, ESL, everything. I was very different. So during my entire professional career at the beginning, I had to present as white. Obviously, I didn't know these knowingly.
For
Then
sure.
I go and I teach U.S. government in a school, the largest school in the state of North Carolina, which I will not say, but
Yeah.
there were only 3 Latin faculty members. 2 of
Mm,
them taught Spanish, and then there was me.
mm,
Everybody in my department, except for an African American lady that taught African American studies, and myself, was white.
mm,
And there were a lot of jokes about like, oh, you're like Dora the Explorer, you love Taco Bell, and I'm taking all that and being like, this is hilarious, this is so funny, because I don't even know what to do with that.
yeah.
Mm.
And so it's in this constant retelling of the story, like, I am not like them. And then finally, I mean, again, it's been a 24-year journey of being like, what are you doing?
Mm,
Because deep down, it's not like all these white people are like, hey, girl, you're like one of us. No, 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 no. I was still not one of them. And yet I wasn't even honest and truthful about who I was. And my worth was being defined by a comparison
ooh,
Mm.
that was just not even grounded on anything.
yeah.
So I feel like when you're saying there's so many immigrants that have a different view, and I would say, yes, if you had caught me 10 years ago, I would be in the same boat of saying,
Yeah.
like, you know what, those people need to do it the right way. Let's follow the laws. Like, look at me. I went to college. I have a great job. Like, I'm doing differently.
Yeah.
And then you have to be like, wait a second.
Mm.
Wait a second. Like, I'm not taking all the right things into account. I'm not looking at all the factors. I'm not looking,
Yeah.
my view is skewed,
Yeah.
and it cannot be.
Yeah. I'm curious. Was there a one thing, or was it like maybe a group of things or multiple things that led you to that aha moment? Because that's what I feel like for all of us. Like, again, you said this is not a conversation that's happening in our home countries. For me, also coming here, and it's like, oh wait, I seen as less. Oh, people questioning my intelligence, people questioning, why is your English so good? You know, as if we can have good education outside of the US, which
Come
we've talked
on,
about plenty.
somebody.
So yeah, I'm curious, when was that aha moment? Or was it an experience? Was it a moment, or was it just over time? Can you share with us? Because I think that that's so like rich and deep, and just a whole different side and story.
I think a lot started to change when I became a mom. And so when Samuel was born in 2011, and there were a little bit more conversations around our understanding of race. And my brother, Andrew, he's my brother-in-law, he's Chinese American. And he is in education as well, and he is in human resources. And he was talking to me about microaggressions. And I was like, wait, what? What are microaggressions? And so he started explaining to me, say, you know, when people say these things and they're hurtful, but you don't know how to handle them. And so you just kind of like, haha, chuckle and kind of move on. And I was like, yes. And so he kind of planted a seed. And then a year after, in 2012, I took the Latasha Morrison's course, Be the Bridge.
Yeah.
And so we dove in, and I was like, my head's on fire. I'm on fire. Like, I cannot believe how many of these messaging I have internalized without fully knowing what's going on. Like, it's crazy how I don't even love myself because I have ingested, digested, and incorporated this idea that I am lesser than, and I'm literally toning myself down, whitewashing myself to be found acceptable. And when I realized that, and I was able to put that into words, there was this sense of grief, of almost saying like, wait, God made me, and he said it is good the way I was made. I was born in a particular country, to a particular family, to a particular people by design. And he was glad about that. And all of a sudden, there I am, whitewashing the whole thing to try to become pleasing to man. And I think in that reckoning, there was this deep sense of sadness of being like, wow, I completely missed the mark. Let me see what kind of steps I need to take to undo what I've done.
Wow. That is so good. Angelica, like, you just preached a whole sermon, I think.
A whole sermon.
But also, yeah, I have definitely heard of Latasha Morrison, Be the Bridge, and that is amazing. I feel like that is actually when you first started talking about, who you are and share with us a little bit about the work that you do. I honestly was like, so you're a bridge builder. Like that was literally what popped into my head. And I mean, we need that way more here in the States. Just because of the importance of, we're all, I think, even as an American, we're all living these lives like, oh, I gotta get here, I gotta reach this, I gotta attain this, I gotta fit in here. And there's just so much of like our story that is wrapped up in exactly what you were saying, like trying to be someone that we're not. Like trying to be someone that God did not intend for us to be. He specifically, like you said, plucked you to drop you here to show you how unique and special you are, and how loved you were there and still are here, But we all
Yeah.
struggle with that so much. So I'm just grateful for you sharing that, because that is some good wisdom right there for sure.
Yeah.
Thank you.
And it just reminded me of what Ligia, the last episode we released, she said, it's not a mistake. God
Yeah.
made me the color that he wanted to make me, that we were born where we were born, that our immigration stories happen the way they happen. It's not a surprise to him. And that's the thing that we forget. It is not a surprise. So having this idea of like, this is the ideal, it's such a worldly view,
That's
of
what I love about this
ourselves.
podcast. We're basically, we're coming at it from, like we've said, like our faith is we believe in Jesus, we believe in God. Like our faith is what dictates these conversations, because like Marlon said at the beginning, like this can easily be politicized, and this can easily be something where we're whitewashing, we're really taking from culture of, here in the States, and we're explaining things away. But
Yeah.
the whole point of what I love everyone has been able to share, and what Marlon was just touching on, is the fact that, but God sees it differently, and we're tapping into what God intended for it to be, not what US and what, our founders intended this to be, but like literally what the Lord designed for his people.
1000%. 1000%.
Yeah,
And
and I
unfortunately,
think too,
oh, go ahead. Go
sorry,
ahead. No, go ahead.
reclaiming that idea of diversity. Like God
Yes.
loves diversity. If you want to take it
He
away from the
created
human
it.
experience,
Yeah.
well, even like look at the birds. He could have made one bird, but he made thousands of birds and fish and flora, fauna. I mean, come on. Why wouldn't he want to be just as creative with human beings, And I love Revelation. My absolute favorite is like every tribe, every tongue, every group of people will be at the end as he intended, worshiping him. And I'm like, okay, y'all, if he wanted us all to look the same and speak the same, it wouldn't say that. That when he makes all
Come on.
things new, it would be as he created them. So if we're going to end in diversity, then he created diversity, right? And so for me, it's like, there's nothing more biblical than that idea that he wanted us all to look different and sound different and speak different languages. I'm like, it's like the way that we are. It's like a love letter back of being like, look at how well we're living into these beautiful different ways that you made us.
It's so true. So good.
And it echoes what Psalm says. Like, if we truly believe everything of who God is, then when he, says in scripture, you were wonderfully and fearfully made. Like, those are not like light words. That's like deep love. It's like, I fearfully and wonderfully made you. So who am I? A mere human to say something else against that truth, that absolute truth of my fellow image bearers. And unfortunately, this is why we're having these conversations, because it has been made into awful things, distorted his word and
Culturalized.
his truth, and culturalized. And I think, and like, and we've talked about what is cultural and what is scripture, right?
Yeah.
I've had to do that with both my own culture from growing up in Honduras, but also the American culture. You know, it's like, what is cultural? What have we made cultural into saying, well, this is what God is saying? And
Mm-hmm.
this conversation of diversity and immigration have been politicized. And that politicization has also bled into American churches, where the conversation also, in my experience, at least personally, has not been great in many ways. That makes me personally the saddest when I have conversations with fellow Christians who read scripture, who say they profess and love the Lord, and yet
Mm.
have and treat, you know, fellow image bearers, even fellow brothers and sisters, in an dishonoring manner, you know?
Mhm.
So, yes, definitely all
Well,
the things.
and we did an episode a little while back now, but Marlon and I basically just talked about immigration and what the Bible has to say about immigration. And I mean, if you look in scripture, there's so many times that we're called to love one another. We're called to
Mm,
bear each other's burdens. We're called to, and I don't think God says that as like a, oh yeah, your neighbor next door that you look like and you sound like and you act like. No, your neighbor across the street, your neighbor in a different town, your neighbor that's doing, all these different like just like different things and like the work that you're doing, the people that you're helping, like all of that is our neighbor and all of that is the ones that we're called to love. And so that's where it's like, as believers, you can look at this from two different angles, right? But as a believer, loving your neighbor, loving each other well, doesn't look like you have to put a standard upon, you have to look like this, sound like this, act like this for me to love you.
mm,
No, what
yeah,
loving your neighbor looks like is loving them as God made them to be, which is different, which is,
yeah.
it comes with a lot of different, background and experiences and upbringings. And that's the beauty of it. So I think this is a great
Mm,
transition. I'm getting very excited about this if you couldn't tell. But I think this is a great transition, Angelica, because um, speaking of differences, speaking of your experience growing up in Colombia, like coming here to the States, what is something, and having to work through all that you said you worked through, of a crash course in humility, being able to understand, no, I'm made the way I'm made for a reason, like all of the things that you've had to work through. What is something you want people to learn about your country and your culture?
So, well, first and foremost about my country, that it's wonderful.
There you go. There
But
you
I
go.
think, I mean, that applies to all my neighbors to the north and the south. Like, we have beautiful, rich cultures. We are proud people. We are proud of our food. We're proud of our
mhm,
language. We're proud of our
mm,
families. We're proud of our heritage. Like, we are proud people, and we love, like, I love being Colombian. My
mm,
kids describe themselves as Colombian. We wear little flags around our wrists. Like, I'm
Oh,
full on. Like, I love being Colombian. So I just want people to know that, like, there is such
mm,
joy of
yeah.
being Colombian. I'm not ashamed. I'm not quiet about it. I'm not wishing I hadn't been born there. Like, I am
Mm,
so glad I was born there,
there you
you know,
go.
yeah.
and being able to share that with my kids, and that
Hmm.
I think Colombians, we are known for being very loud and party people. Like, we just have
You
a
guys
party
know how to
wherever we
party.
go.
I was just
We
there
know
and
how to
like,
party.
oh my
I
gosh.
mean, it does not matter if you have means or not means. We can party, and we don't need a lot. We just need a little bit of music, and off we go. Like,
It's so true.
we can be simple people, you know. Even some of our food is like, seriously, that's all it is. It's like, yeah, just flour and water, and we'll make some sort of bread, and we'll eat that and dance till we drop.
I love
So
it.
I would say that I'm very Colombian in that. I love that. Something I want to always talk about my culture is that we see the world differently. And that applies to a lot of my brothers and sisters in Latin America. American culture is, and this is neither good nor bad.
Yeah.
It's just different. American culture is really focused on the individual. And so as an individual, you have things like agency. You're taught at an early age that you need to know who you are, what you want, where you're going, what your boundaries are. And you are told from a very early age that the most important to be is self-reliant and independent. Like that is in the water. I mean, from the way that Americans raise their kids at age 2, it's like, Johnny, would you like an apple pouch or would you like a banana? Like Johnny is being pre-programmed to make decisions because he's supposed to thrive at age 18. And if he fails on his own. Sorry, not sorry, Johnny. You should have advocated better for yourself. That's not bad or it's not wrong. But it's radically different to the way Latin American people see the world. We are a collective culture. So it's not that we have a failure to launch, it's that we believe there is power in the collective. And so you tend to stay close to your family. You have big family ties. No one's kicking you out at 18. It's kind of like, yeah, do fly, but you will always have the group to rely on. So there's positives and negatives, right? Depending on how you look at it. But usually within our culture, people specialize on something. So, and you have very clear leadership structures. So here in the States, you're always told, like, if you have initiative, you should go to your boss and tell them what your idea is. And like, that's how you get ahead. Where in our culture, that's not okay. In our culture, the boss is the one that knows how things are done and what to do. And you wait for your boss to invite you into a higher position because hierarchy is such a big deal. So when you have that conflicting value, it's happened to me. Like I've been passed over on jobs because my boss would say, well, you didn't come in asking for a raise or wanting a promotion. I'm like, because that's rude. You didn't invite me. And so we're like, oh my gosh, we have a different playbook. So if you take that concept and you apply it somewhere else, where I'm going, you're like, where are you going with this? Is that when we work with immigrant communities, we make a lot of assumptions that are incorrect. So for example, when I took Samuel to his first pediatrician appointment, as a Colombian mother who's never had a kid in this country or anyone in this country to pave the way, I functioned as a Colombian. I assume, like in Colombia and in Latin America, you hand the baby, and while the doctor is prodding, moving, measuring, and doing the magic juju that doctors do, you chit-chat about anything. Because Latin American people are relational. Nothing happens without relationship, which is not the same as in the U.S. The U.S. is transactional. So even those basic concepts. And so the doctor said to me, hey, Miss Garnett, do you have any questions for me? And I was like, what a darling doctor. I'm thinking we're becoming friends. And so I'm like, well, doctor, I won't say her name. How many kids do you have? How long have you been married? What's your favorite color? Where do you like go on vacation? What do you like to eat? We had like a 30-minute chat. And then I went to my next appointment and she was really stern. And she said, I'm really concerned that you have chosen not to vaccinate. And we really need to talk about your vaccine schedule. I'm sorry, I chose what? She's like, yes, I asked you if you had questions. You had no questions. And I'm going like, oh my gosh, like I am working with a completely different set of rules where I am assuming it's like a quick oil change. I hand the kid over, you vaccinate or you do whatever. I'm not a doctor. So in our collective culture, everyone has a role and you don't play the part of expert. You trust that the other person, because it's collective, has your best interest at heart and you let them do the work. That does not apply in the U.S. In the U.S., everyone's an expert at everything. So as a brand new mom, I'm supposed to know whether I'm breastfeeding or bottle feeding, whether vaccines are good or bad, whether I'm switching or not the schedule. Then the doctor said, do you want to do baby-led weaning? I'm like, say what? She's like, yeah, it's like you let the baby decide when the baby starts eating. And I'm laughing in my head going like, you let a baby decide what? Like, this is bananas. In Colombia, all Colombian babies eat the same junk at 3 months because you have a chart. And everyone does the same thing. So The reason why I share this story is because when you start working in the immigrant community, you see the American providers getting so frustrated and arriving at conclusions like those moms don't care. They're not really interested in their kids' health or their education. They're not asking for services. And I'm always like, time out, you guys. If I'm a Latin American parent freshly arrived and I'm going to the school, don't ask me to say I want an IEP and my kid might have a disability. That is not how we function. We're coming to the school and it's your job to tell me what my kid needs. So we need to learn to make those bridges because we're arriving at the wrong conclusion because we don't understand each other's cultures. And so it's this constant missing. And I do a lot of work with health departments of saying like, no. You have to spell it out to newcomers who are expecting them. They're expecting you to tell them what to do.
Right.
They have no idea that they should have done all this reading prior and coming in guns blazing with crazy things like, you work for me. And one of my first fights in my marriage was I was in the hospital and the doctor apparently was not believing me that I was in crazy pain. And then when Tyler came in, I was like, oh, I'm in a lot of pain. He's like, didn't you say to the doctor? I was like, yeah, but I don't think he believes me. And Tyler's like, it doesn't matter. He works for me. Call the doctor. I'm like, ay, Dios mío, now for sure I'm going to die. Like, please don't bring me to the doctor, you know. So that's such a clear, like for me, doctor reverence. If I die, well, it's because the good doctor decided I die, you know. And my husband's like, are you serious? He works for you. Tell him what you want. I'm like, ay, Dios mío, I just want to be alive.
Yeah, exactly. Oh my God.
Yeah. No,
Goodness.
that's incredible. I think it's a wonderful example of like just cultural differences, which actually just made me think about, you know, about my personal experiences. I'm like, oh yeah, that surprised me. You know, it feels very transactional versus, you know, the interpersonal relationship that, you know, we have kind of like a family doctors, like even they become a part of, because yeah, this is the family doctor, this is the doctor everyone goes to, you know, and this is a
And
doctor.
you say things like, ay, doctor, you remember like my cousin had something the other day and the doctor's like, oh yeah, terrible. Like here would be like, HIPAA regulation says that I cannot talk to you about your cousin. And you're like, come on, man, I don't know what the injury is, but you know, it's like in the family.
Yeah, no, that is so true. That is so true. Yeah, so different. Thank you for sharing that because it's also gives people that are not familiar with Latin American culture or specific also Colombian culture. Hey, you know, these are some differences, things that allow us to think, oh yeah, things work differently in other parts of the world, and we can expect for it to just click. You know,
And
there's
what I
a
say, like,
learning curve.
and you lead with curiosity, kind of saying like,
Yeah.
you know, like I'm noticing like, and then the doctor and I had a good conversation. I was like, oh, 10-4, I will have a plan. I have my American husband to tell me the ways, but you know, like, but I think it's with everything, even the way we communicate, like Latin Americans, we communicate to make you feel good. Everything is about the feel good because we're relational. Americans are communicating to complete a task. So communication is very efficient and to the point. And Americans will say to you, it's not personal. Well, that's impossible for a Latin American person. If it's coming out of your mouth, it's personal, okay? You're talking to me, you're a person, I'm a person. And so it's even in understanding that when you go to meetings to school, some of the school personnel is like, oh my God, they're talking forever. And I'm like, but it's about their kids, you know? Like they're going to tell you things that are irrelevant, but you know, it's the relationship.
Yeah.
No,
Oh
that's
my
so
gosh, I have
good.
so many aha moments right now. I'm like, oh yeah, whoa, that makes sense now. Yeah.
Like, that's always Tyler. I mean, it's not personal. I'm like, but you're telling me your beloved spouse. Of course it's personal. I'm just communicating. I'm like, well, that's not how I communicate.
You put words to so many things that I was like, that's exactly how I would explain it or describe it. But I've never put it in the terms of like transactional relational. Because I'm always like, other cultures are so tight knit. I think I always just say tight knit, but like relational makes way more sense.
Absolutely. Yeah. So as we are getting to, the end of our conversation, I want, if you can share with us, we always ask our guests you shared, some of your story, some of the work you do, and especially the work you do. Would love for you to expand a little bit more as we talk about how can we love well immigrants, like in your personal experience, not only, and maybe think about this like personally, how have you experienced that, but also through your work, how can we love well immigrants?
Okay, that's a great question. I would say on an interpersonal level, just
Mhm.
curiosity, period. If there's
Mhm.
something that makes no sense, don't jump to conclusions, just ask.
Mm.
Like, you did this. I'm not really understanding. Would you care explaining? So there's these, I think it's this understanding that there's mutuality. Like, I
Mhm.
see you as an equal, and what you're doing or saying is not computing. And I want to make sure that there is an opportunity for me to learn from you. Like,
So
it's
good.
that idea of like hospitality goes both ways. And it doesn't necessarily need to look like, yeah, I gave you clothes or I gave you money and therefore I'm at a higher level than you. But it's like hospitality is also the way that you see the world in a way that is more expansive and richer. And a lot of times it's through the engagement with people who are different from you that your like mind expands and your heart expands. So that for me, because a lot of times in communities, people are like, hey, we have newly arrived people. We need furniture. We need this. We need that. And so people are very generous, which I appreciate, but they come in guns blazing as that they are providing all these things. And then for me, it becomes unbalanced. So I'm always like, hospitality goes both ways. As
Mhm.
you're giving maybe some material goods, how is your heart being changed? How are you seeing things differently? How is it expanding your understanding of other cultures or other people? So always with curiosity. I would say I always ask people to go to the border. Like, as I said, I serve for ABARA and we have border encounters. Those are 3-day immersive trips for anybody. It could be a group, it can be an individual. But I think for me, it has been very impactful to be in person at the border and experience what we're talking about. It's very easy to even arrive at a conclusion or have a point of view when it's so far away, but it's much more difficult to come to quick conclusions when you're in it. And so I think it was really hard for me. I started going to the border in 2019, so it's almost 5 years now. But I remember the first time being able to cross the bridge from El Paso to Juarez and then doing something in Juarez and then returning and being able to just fly back, with that blue passport. It was like, welcome, welcome. And as you're going up the street, you see people that are stuck. And it's really hard because they look like you, they sound like you, but by pure, I don't know, value of that blue book, there is a disconnect. And so when you live that and it's embodied, how do you respond to that? How do you understand that? Where it's just so much, it's so nuanced that it really helps for you to be there. Like, being able to see the fence and being able to see some of the faces. And even through ABARA, you are able to meet with Border Patrol. So if you're on the other end, also vilifying some of our government officials, well, that's not helpful either because they're also human beings. So I think that what I like about Border Encounters is that the goal is to bridge divides and to help you see the bigger picture. So I always invite people, I'm like, come and see for yourself. See what the Spirit of God is up to and how he's going to move you and inform you. So that's it. Locally, ask better questions. Understand that hospitality is mutual, is both ways. In terms of like, what can you do is get your body to the border if you can to have an embodied experience. And then I would also say always, when possible, what you guys are doing, ask for stories if appropriate. Even as someone who is an immigrant, who has done a lot of work in immigration locally and at the border, I had a massive come to Jesus moment. I was interviewing a mom, and until that moment, I always had these, I just have to confess, like I was judgmental of moms who send their kids. And I was like, what kind of mom would do that? Like, I don't think I could do that. I don't think I can understand it or I can make sense of it. That was my point of view. And I'm sitting down, I'm interviewing this woman, and she starts crying, breaking down. We find out she has 3 kids. They're the same age as my 3 kids. And she, the day before, had sent them up the river. And I am asking her questions. I'm like, would you care to explain, like, what happened? And so she's bawling, saying, like, we had completely run out of money and we were in Juarez and I was going to have to sleep on the street. And there is this possibility for human trafficking in Juarez. And I'm just a woman. So I'm willing, if something is supposed to happen to me and or raped or kidnapped or trafficked, that's on me. But I can't put my babies through that. So I had a split-second decision. It was either the street or the river. And I chose the river because I knew even in detention, even if they were in jail, they would have a bathroom, a bed, and food. And I am telling you, I could not stop weeping. And I remember asking her for forgiveness of not having a mind big enough or compassionate enough to understand that that decision is not made lightly, and that in our mothering, we had the same desire to see our children safe and thriving. And I, for some bizarre reason, was thinking of myself better than her, not understanding the price that she was paying. And she was so gracious and she was so kind, and she really changed my mind. And I told her that I would always carry her with me. So I have her tattooed in my arm. And it's a reminder to be kinder. That hesed of God, the kindness, the extravagant love that asks better questions. And so for me, she's on my arm to remind me to be curious and to remind me to ask questions. So that's what I would say. Stay curious and ask questions. Center the people. Immigration needs to be centered on immigrants. It cannot be centered on people of privilege that have been here forever. Center the immigrants and ask better questions.
Wow.
That story gave me literal
Yeah.
chills. Wow. Thank you for sharing. We feel honored, and it's a privilege to always just step into people's stories. And
Oh my
what
gosh,
you just
yeah.
said, it's we don't take that lightly. This is real life. These are real people.
Yeah.
And it's important for us to really wake up to that and realize, and get out of our comfort zones, and really, really, really see, okay, God
And
sees,
I
God
know.
sees.
Okay, I promise this is my last comment, but we're people of faith, right? And I was saying this at a church recently. I said, okay, so the majority of people that are coming are from Venezuela. They're having to cross the Darien Gap, which is an impenetrable jungle. It's a disaster. So it is 25,000 miles from the Gap in Colombia to El Paso, Texas. That is the equivalent of like an insane amount of marathons. I think it's like 59. Because if you do like 250 divided by 26, it's like 59 or something like that. I said, not only have they walked more than I could ever walk in a lifetime, but they have survived. You don't even understand what they had to survive. So I was asking the church, I was like, church, wake up. What do we do in the face of a miracle? Because when these individuals are standing before us, they are a miracle. It is a miracle that they made it to us. How do we respond to a miracle? Do we respond to a miracle by saying there's no room? That sounds a lot like baby Jesus. Do we respond to a miracle by turning away? Like, how do we respond to a miracle? And so I think when you reframe it and you say our entire scripture is filled with immigration stories, with migrants moving. And so the people of God are constantly migrating. How are we receiving these miracles? And so I think that is for us as Christians to engage our imagination. Like, we are people of abundance because we follow an abundant God. We are people of radical welcome. How are we welcoming the miracles? And so I promise I'm done, but I was like, it's so important to who we are.
I'm
Amen.
so
Yeah.
glad you shared that. Oh my
Yes.
gosh. Angelica, like I'm still processing everything that you're saying, but just how you frame that, they are walking miracles. We actually had a guest on here. He was from the Congo. His name's John as well. And he and his family, he has like, I think it's 9 of them total, so he has like 8 siblings. They all well, they're refugees, so they all like left the Congo when war broke out. But I mean, he explained that exact running through the jungle, walking like miles and miles and miles. He was at a refugee camp for 9 years, only ate rice and beans every single day.
Mm.
And I mean, his dad, his faith is what carried them all the way to the States and what carried them all the way to now being, living in Nashville, and he's an artist, he's a singer, songwriter. But I mean, those are the walking miracles that you're talking
Walking
about.
miracles.
And wow, what a
Literally.
reminder. What a reminder.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah. No, it's beautiful. Beautiful and yeah, an encouragement. So I hope that if you're hearing this, as we feel encouraged, but also challenged,
I was
in
gonna
what
say, I
way
don't know about
this
you, but I think this
conversation
is the most
challenge.
challenging conversation we've had when it
Yeah.
comes to, because we made it so clear earlier in this episode of we're believers. We
Yeah.
believe in God.
Mhm.
We go to church, like we are called to be set apart. And how are we being set apart
Yeah.
in this topic? How are we being set apart in
Yeah.
welcoming these walking miracles and not being so influenced by culture and society?
Mm. Amen.
Mm,
That's the
that's
work
some
right there.
challenging thoughts right there.
That's the work right there. And one we
Mhm.
have to, strive for and work for every day of our lives.
Mhm.
Angelica, this conversation has been amazing,
Woo!
incredible. Yes.
It's
As you can
insane.
see, yes, it's amazing. And we were actually talking with Anna when I was telling her before you hopped on, that we actually want to do a trip to the border at some point. So you might
Yes.
the Level podcast on the road,
That's where
Yes,
we're
let's
um,
heading.
go. Let's
because yeah,
go.
it's a whole different experience. And I told yeah, even myself as an immigrant, that I know it's a different that's a
Mhm.
something different that I am very unfamiliar with that I
Mhm.
need to also experience. So yes, it's a
Yes,
challenge for us
please
as
join
well.
us. We are totally set up
Yeah,
for that. And we love
yeah,
to welcome people. I mean, seriously.
That's
yes,
amazing.
no, definitely.
It will
We'll
happen.
we'll, we'll make it happen at some point. At some point, but thank you again. We are honored and privileged that you shared everything that you shared, your story. We honor it.
Brought us to
We celebrate
church.
it, and we took it to church. It was an incredibly rich and just beautiful conversation. Thank you for not holding back, telling things as they are, just sharing so much truth, honesty, but also in such a gracious way. Yeah, so
Also,
I'm
one
very
more thing
grateful for
before
that.
we go. How can people find out more about your work that you're doing? If you want to share like your personal social account so they can get in contact if they have questions, if they're like, man, this is really interesting stuff. How can they get in contact with you?
Thank you. To learn more about our organization, it's ABARA, so www.abara.org. And they can always contact me on Instagram at Angelica Garnett. And
Okay.
I mean, as Marlon can attest, I love talking to people, meeting
Yeah,
with people, talking to groups. I mean, I just love people. So,
yeah. So
Yay.
if you want, if you go to church, or even if you just with a group of friends, now there's someone that you can invite to come and speak and share, from a completely and definitely refreshing perspective. So Angelica, once again, thank you.
thank you
And
for
to
inviting me.
It's been an honor, honestly.
it
Thank you
has
so
been
much.
truly, truly, truly. And to everyone listening, thank you for joining in. And we'll catch you next week.
All right.